Good morning, Nick. The matter is now really with the coroner and with the independent investigator, the IOPC. But I can say that from the evidence that we have heard, sadly passed away, didn't have an infectious disease
Right.
like diphtheria, and we suspect this was an individual who was unwell when they came to the country.
Do we know when he arrived in the country, Minister?
We do know the date that he entered the country and how he was cared for whilst he was here.
When did he arrive, Minister?
I can't release the specific details of him, I'm afraid. We're
Why?
at the moment we're still trying to contact his next of kin, and so it is important for us to treat this with respect. That's not easy in these
How old was he?
circumstances.
What was his rough age?
I'm not going to release details of him at this stage, I'm afraid. I hope you'll understand that it would be right for me to do
Minister,
that.
you're telling me that, as we know, in some days more than 1,000 people arrive on these shores, and you can neither give me the man's country of origin or his rough age range. That is to say, he's from Iran and he's in his 40s. You're telling me that those are officially, almost official police details, are you?
No, I'm saying that
How would you
if some
possibly,
if an
Minister?
indiv
How would you
Nick, I'm not
possibly
sure.
identify a man from Iran in his 40s? How would the family? Oh, that's him. Why can't we know more?
Well, I think it's right that we wait until we've contacted the individual's next of kin before we
I'm
go
not
into
asking for the
details
name,
about who he
Minister.
was, where he came from, and so on. I hope you'll respect that.
Well, okay, I'm not asking. I say again, I'm not asking for the name. It might be helpful to have a little more detail. How many people are currently in Manston, Minister?
I think there's around 300 people who are there, and there'll be fewer over the course of today as more people move on to other accommodation. So there's been a huge effort over the last 2 or 3 weeks to reduce the population of the site from over 4,000 to where it is today. It's functioning as it should be now, which is as a short-term processing unit where people's security details, like their biometrics, are taken and then they're removed as quickly as possible and sent on to other accommodation.
Let's move to other matters. The Prime Minister, you'll be aware, is addressing the annual CBI conference later today, and he will be told by business leaders, we read, that we need to increase migration to tackle, quotes, vast labour shortages. However, it is understood Mr Sunak will say that government will boost growth through spurring innovation. Who's right, Minister?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is right that the way to grow, support entrepreneurs and businesses to innovate. I think it's important that the government and the Home Office in particular has a productive relationship with business in discussing particular skills shortages and takes a pragmatic view. But I don't think that we should be reaching to more migration in the first instance. The most important thing is to help British workers to get the skills, the training they need to take those jobs
But
in the first instance. There are 5 million economically inactive people in this country, over 500,000 who left the workforce during the pandemic, and we want to help as many of them as possible back into employment.
so Tony Danker, who I'm sure you're aware of, or man you may well know, says that we need to, quotes, be practical and bring in workers, close quotes, for where there are shortage of skills in certain areas and professions and trades. He's wrong, is he, Minister?
Well, I know Tony Danker very well and respect his judgment. Work with the CBI on particular specific skills shortages. You can see that in some of the interventions that we've made in recent years, like the creation of the health and social care visa that's helped thousands of doctors and nurses and social care workers to come to the UK to support the NHS, and we welcome that. But it's also true that there are millions of people who are not in the workforce, and I think it's the first duty of a government to support them back into work first before reaching for foreign workers. And that's the kind of relationship that we want to have with the business community, where we're helping them to ensure that education and skills training in different parts of the country is right so that we can get British workers into those jobs. Last year, we issued over 300,000 work visas to the UK, but it's simply not true that the government has adopted a sort of closed door approach since we left the European Union. What we have done is focus that on people who meet a certain income threshold, so those people who are earning more and can support themselves and their families, and also those people in skilled shortages. And I think that's the right approach.
Noting, just a couple of last questions, noting that you were, until last year, the Housing Secretary, how did we get to a situation in the United Kingdom where a housing accommodation is so parlous a 2-year-old boy died due to mould?
Because I thought that was an extremely sad case and does require urgent action by social housing providers across the country. When I was Housing Secretary, we did a white paper on the future of social housing and its regulation, and that's led to a law now which is going through Parliament, the Social Housing Regulation Bill, and that tries to ensure that there is a much stricter regulatory regime around housing of this type. And also, and I think most importantly, if you're a resident and you're experiencing problems like this young man's family, or indeed the residents of Grenfell Tower, your voices are actually heard and your complaints are acted upon, because too many residents have felt that they were ignored or considered unimportant by their social housing providers. We want to change that.
So that what happened to that little lad up in Rochdale, you're confident now as a result of the white paper you and your colleagues brought forward, that can't happen in the United Kingdom again, Mr. Jenrick?
Well, I certainly hope that it never happens again. And Michael Gove, my successor in that role, has written to all council housing and housing association providers across the country, highlighting it, setting out the changes that we're making in this new bill and asking them to raise their game, because nobody should be in that position in any type of housing, but certainly not in housing that is created by the state or by charitable organisations.
Last couple of questions. Coming back to the situation regarding our friends in Europe, now that Britain has exited the European Union, there seems to be some degree of enthusiasm in some quarters for a so-called Swiss deal. Would you agree with that? And if not, why not?
No, I don't agree with that, and it's not the position of this government. I know there was some reporting at the weekend in the papers, but we don't recognise that that's not the position of this government. We had a big debate as a country about the precise nature of the relationship a few years ago. We settled on what I think is the right relationship, which is one whereby we are friends and neighbours and trading partners, but we don't have freedom of movement, we don't pay money to the European Union, and we don't allow the jurisdiction of European judges in British courts. And we don't intend to change that. Those are the fundamental tenets of our relationship. Of course, there will be things we can do to improve that relationship, and I think Rishi Sunak wants to have the most productive, constructive relationship with the EU in areas like trade, and particular to me at the Home Office in security and immigration. But we're not going to reopen the settlement that we reached in 2020. That is the fundamental position going forwards, and anyone concerned about this issue should have their worries alleviated.
And notwithstanding the importance of where Mr. Sunak is later today, a lot of eyes will be focused on Qatar at lunchtime and again in the evening when both England and Wales kick off their campaigns. Should their respective captains, Harry Kane and Gareth Bale, wear the One Love or the Gay Pride armband? Mr. Jenrick?
I think that's a choice for them, and I respect their judgment. They're both great team captains, and we'll be cheering on England and Wales over the course of the tournament. It's their judgment, and I think it's a valid point that we make the case for LGBT rights. We in the UK quite rightly have high standards in that regard, and Qatar has a different approach. I think it's perfectly valid for England and Wales to make that argument and so to make the point.
Lastly, what would your advice to be to any constituents from Newark who are LGBT plus going to watch the games? What would your advice be to them?
Well, I think when you visit a foreign country, you always have to respect their laws and values, but we do take a different approach on this issue. And some issues are of the utmost importance. They're universal values. That's how we view the right of LGBT people to express themselves. And so I would ask them to be respectful, but not ask them to change the way international.
Grateful for your time. We battled a little bit with the phone line. I hope you could hear me at times better than we heard you, but thank you for your input. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick appearing here on LBC. A little late to the headlines. 7:48, Simon Conway.
England and Wales are preparing for their opening matches at the World Cup in Qatar later.